You are often labeled as excessively quiet, intensely focused, or simply too much. When you express yourself, a noticeable silence falls upon the room. This reaction is not a result of error, but rather a response to your inherent difference. You possess an acute ability to perceive details that escape the attention of others and to scrutinize beliefs that the majority accepts without question. Consequently, people begin to naturally distance themselves. They find shared amusement in trivialities that you find tedious. They become preoccupied with superficial dramas, fleeting fads, and meaninglessness. Meanwhile, your thoughts are constantly consumed by fundamental matters of existence, purpose, and mortality. Despite this internal divergence, you attempt to assimilate. You offer the expected smile during appropriate moments. Yet, deep inside, you experience profound alienation, feeling like an outsider among your contemporaries. Inevitably, you start to question your own nature. Is there an inherent flaw within me? However, consider an alternative perspective. Perhaps the difficulty lies not with you, but with a societal structure fundamentally ill-equipped for individuals of your cognitive type. The renowned German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer posited that true, unadulterated intelligence inherently isolates. He argued that as the depth of your contemplation increases, so does your separation from the mainstream. This is rooted in the fact that most people do not seek difficult truths. They primarily desire ease and reassurance. Intelligent individuals, by challenging prevailing illusions, pose a direct threat to that established comfort. This video aims to rigorously examine the harsh reality. Schopenhauer identified the reasons why the collective rejects genuinely deep thinkers, and why the loneliness you experience could paradoxically serve as the ultimate validation of your intellect. This pattern manifests early in life. You might be physically present in a school environment, surrounded by peers, yet you sense a fundamental lack of synchronicity. This feeling is one of disconnection, not superiority. While others engage in unthinking laughter, your mind is absorbed in internal inquiry. Why do people communicate without sincerity? Why do superficial conversations feel like auditory clutter? Why does it seem as though you are perpetually observing life as a spectator, rather than actively participating in it? This sensation marks the initial experience of the quiet affliction that often accompanies deep intellect. This is not about academic achievement, grades, or accolades. It refers to a type of intelligence that insists on excessive questioning and experiences emotions with extraordinary intensity. An intelligence that keenly observes human inconsistency, recognizes subtle pretenses, and finds it psychologically impossible to simply follow the status quo. As you progress through life, the sense of being out of sync becomes noticeably more pronounced. You begin to consciously restrain your input in dialogues. You have come to realize that unvarnished truth tends to agitate others, and posing the fundamental question of why too frequently disrupts the social atmosphere. Consequently, you resort to affirming nods, performing polite smiles, and simulating engagement, primarily because achieving genuine comprehension feels entirely unattainable. People frequently misinterpret your quiet reserve or self-importance, when in fact, you are simply fatigued by the constant effort required to articulate your perspective. You are not emotionally detached. You have merely assimilated the painful lesson that emotional depth often intimidates individuals. Therefore, you keep your profound observations sequestered, your critical inquiries suppressed, and your underlying emotional pain concealed. A profound paradox exists here. Society openly champions the concept of intellect, yet it emotionally marginalizes those who possess it in its most authentic, unrefined state. We pay tribute to genius in theory, but in practical reality, the truly sharp-minded are left isolated. Why is this so? Because authentic intelligence does not merely solve conventional problems. It actively critiques existing standards. It discerns and dismantles illusions. It challenges assumptions that others accept without thought. And this process generates considerable discomfort for those around you. You become too intricate for superficial social exchanges. You are too analytical to simply enjoy simple pleasures without mentally deconstructing them. You are too profoundly aware to ever fully relax. And the resulting emotional toll is palpable, though often invisible and deeply painful. You may find yourself in crowded spaces, yet experience profound solitude. You desperately yearn for a relational bond that extends beyond the trivial, someone who doesn't just listen, but genuinely grasps your essence. Someone who hears the unstated and understands the concealed. But this companion never materializes. It is at this juncture that the internal question surfaces again. Is my nature fundamentally flawed? This is the silent tragedy. The established world fails to equip deeply intelligent people with the tools to navigate this specific brand of existential solitude. It provides instruction on achieving professional success and maintaining outward performance, but it offers no guidance on how to simply exist when your mind operates on a different frequency. So you adapt your behavior. You become a social chameleon, seamlessly integrating, consciously simplifying your language, and mastering the timing for silence. You do this not by choice, but out of necessity. Every instance where you spoke your unfiltered truth resulted in a social penalty. Inside, however, a cumulative burden develops, a subtle sorrow, a profound craving for significance, and the persistent query, am I truly the only person who feels this way? You must understand, you are not unique in this experience. In fact, what you perceive as silent hardship is not evidence of personal failing. It is a clear indication of a rare cognitive structure striving to survive in a superficial environment. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer recognized and articulated this exact pattern centuries ago. He did not merely empathize with your struggle, he accurately foretold it. A covert principle dictates the operation of most human social interaction. Avoid excessive thought. Do not deviate from the established narrative. Refrain from stepping outside conventional boundaries. Simply adhere to popular consensus. Express only safe, pre-approved opinions. And readily concur with the most vocal entity present. This concept is what Schopenhauer termed the herd, the collective human tendency to abdicate independent thought, not due to lack of intelligence, but because genuinely independent contemplation poses a social risk. This is precisely why truly intelligent individuals generate anxiety. They are feared, not because they possess greater knowledge, but because they refuse to venerate the collective consensus. When someone begins to ask penetrating questions, the group becomes instinctively uneasy. When an individual identifies inherent inconsistencies, accepted falsehoods, or unexamined traditions, the collective responds defensively. This response is psychological, not rational. In virtually every setting, classrooms, workplaces, and communities, a subtle yet potent pressure exists, either conform or be ostracized. By their very nature, deep thinkers resist this imperative. They do so not out of a desire for insubordination, but from an intrinsic drive toward intellectual curiosity and the pursuit of objective truth. Here lies the inconvenient truth. Dissenting thought is rarely admired. It is, instead, perceived and treated as a genuine threat. This is because intellectual depth does not confine itself to questioning simple facts. It rigorously challenges established zones of comfort. It actively shatters illusions. It illuminates every uncomfortable reality that people are collaboratively trying to ignore. When you enter a social setting and voice an observation that exposes the group's underlying hypocrisy, when you propose an idea that lacks prior validation from mass agreement, when you decide to scrutinize the systemic structure instead of merely participating in the game, you do not receive commendation. You are instead labeled as odd, excessively intense, or lacking in team spirit. Consider the contemporary professional environment. We verbally champion innovation and theoretically praise creativity. Yet, in practice, The individuals who articulate inconvenient truths during meetings are frequently marginalized. Employees who question inefficient operating systems are instructed to cease overthinking. Those who abstain from office gossip or forced optimism are branded as antisocial. The educational sector operates similarly. Students who passively comply with regulations are consistently rewarded. Conversely, those who ask too many critical questions are often tagged as disruptive, not because their queries are incorrect, but because they directly challenge the ruling authority. Even online spaces, theoretically designed for the flourishing of free thought, penalize complexity. Algorithms are designed to prioritize simplicity, constant repetition, and emotional manipulation over nuance, intellectual depth, or genuine intelligence. What, then, is the fate of the truly intelligent within such a restrictive framework? They cultivate methods of concealment, choosing to diminish their presence and adopt a protective facade merely to ensure their survival. Ultimately, society attains precisely its desired outcome. Brilliance is silenced. Genuine genius becomes imprisoned behind layers of social anxiety. Tremendous potential is buried beneath years of ingrained self-doubt. Wisdom remains unshared simply because it is consistently unwelcomed. This represents the ultimate irony. The world professes a desire for intelligence, but only for the variant that remains compliant. Only the kind that successfully avoids generating discomfort. Only the version that neatly fits within a predetermined boundary. Yet, authentic intelligence is inherently chaotic. It resists being encapsulated in catchy slogans. It holds no regard for current fads or trends. Crucially, it does not flatter egos. It confronts them directly. And for this very reason, the social structure actively pushes it away. To possess true intellectual depth is to accept inevitable misunderstanding. It means facing fear and enduring isolation in a room where everyone affirms something you know to be false. This outcome is not merely rejection. It is a form of social banishment. When you are capable of perceiving the fundamental rules of the social game, you naturally cease participating in it. And once you stop participating, you lose your place of belonging. That is the inevitable cost of nonconformity. For those individuals who refuse to compromise their cognitive integrity, this is a price they silently endure daily. Nonetheless, Schopenhauer believed this particular form of suffering possessed profound meaning. He viewed intelligence not as a benefit, but as a heavy burden that few possess the internal strength to bear. Those who carry it are compelled to traverse a path that is markedly lonelier, yet fundamentally more honest. Arthur Schopenhauer was far from a conventional philosopher. He possessed an unwavering refusal to sugarcoat reality and offered no false assurances of happiness. His central belief was that life, at its core, is characterized by suffering, and that the degree of your conscious awareness directly correlates with the intensity of that felt suffering. While this perspective may seem profoundly pessimistic to many, to those who have lived through the quiet anguish of perpetual overthinking and heightened emotional sensitivity, it resonates as a profound, long-awaited honesty. Born in 1788 into a prosperous, yet emotionally detached German family, Schopenhauer felt like an outsider from an early age. He observed the world with a level of intensity that made him feel more like an objective observer than an active participant. It was from this vantage point that his entire philosophical system emerged. His most famous assertion states, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." According to Schopenhauer's framework, superior intelligence inevitably results in isolation, not as a deliberate decision, but as a direct consequence of clear-sightedness. The more deeply one grasps the nature of existence, the greater their detachment from those who navigate life's superficial aspects. At the core of his worldview is the concept of the will, an unconscious, relentless force that drives all living beings, seeking endless, painful satisfaction without regard for logic or truth. Most individuals, Schopenhauer argued, are entirely governed by this will, perpetually chasing validation, power, and momentary pleasure, trapped in a self-sustaining cycle of craving they cannot perceive. Conversely, the truly intelligent, the observers and thinkers, begin to identify and step outside this pervasive trap. They achieve detachment, which is precisely where existential pain commences. Once the world is seen for what it largely is, a performance of illusions powered by non-conscious desire, that insight is irreversible. Once you have attained this unfiltered view of the world, you find it impossible to revert. You can no longer share genuine amusement in the same trivialities. You are incapable of engaging in light conversation that feels fundamentally empty. You feel like an invisible presence, a ghost drifting through a continuous social gathering, bewildered as to why no one else recognizes the pervasive lack of meaning. Schopenhauer articulated this concept succinctly. The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. In essence, a lack of deep awareness is not merely contentment. It is a prerequisite for belonging. When you initiate deep inquiries concerning meaning, the nature of morality and mortality, you forfeit your standing within the social collective, not because people harbor animosity toward you, but because they simply fail to comprehend your intellectual landscape. Schopenhauer's perspective was not antisocial. Rather, he believed that society and isolation serve fundamentally different, distinct purposes. Society provides entertainment and distraction. Solitude fosters authenticity and self-realization. The truly perceptive ultimately crave what the social collective is structurally unable to provide: silence, cognitive clarity, and emotional sincerity. This is precisely why Schopenhauer extolled the virtue of solitude, framing it not as a condition of loneliness, but as a state of profound liberation. He declared that great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude. To him, exceptional intellect was not a glamorous advantage. It was an existential burden that systematically stripped away comfort, compelling the thinker into a form of necessary, existential exile. Despite his seemingly somber analysis, Schopenhauer did not endorse passive despair. Instead, he proposed a higher mode of existence achieved through concentrated contemplation, engagement with art, and rigorous philosophy. This path involved converting personal suffering into meaningful insight and transforming one's alienation into genuine wisdom. He was a rare voice among philosophers who validated the pain you experience from excessive thought, asserting that it is entirely real. The sense of disconnection felt when others fail to grasp your concepts is valid. The internal conviction that the world is fundamentally flawed is not a product of imagination. For Schopenhauer, this suffering was simply the inevitable cost of attaining intellectual clarity. While the masses may ridicule those who perceive too much, he offered a quiet reassurance: you are not broken. You are just awake. His philosophy was designed not to provide a definitive fix for life's challenges, but to offer a dignified way to endure them without resorting to self-deception. In the final assessment, while intelligence might isolate you from the collective, it forges a vital bond with truth, beauty, artistic expression, and your own soul, a connection no social gathering can provide, and no rejection can dismantle. Often, loneliness is characterized as a failing in one's social life. But what if occasionally it is the direct consequence of a mind engaged in profound contemplation? Contemporary psychology is increasingly corroborating the insights of philosophers like Schopenhauer. High levels of intelligence frequently correlate with a high degree of isolation. A noteworthy 2016 study published in the British Journal of Psychology revealed a compelling finding. Highly intelligent people report less satisfaction derived from frequent social engagement. For most individuals, social interaction boosts happiness. However, for those with superior intellect, excessive socializing often leads to feelings of intense frustration, mental overstimulation, and a sense of emptiness. The reason is simple. Conventional conversations often remain superficial. while their minds demand nuance, complex ideas, and intellectual depth, not mere gossip or repetitive social noise. This situation creates a distinct type of cognitive loneliness. It is not merely the state of being physically alone, but the deep isolation felt when surrounded by people whose thought processes are fundamentally different from your own, making you feel even more solitary than if you were in actual isolation. This marks the start of the emotional paradox. On one side, highly intelligent individuals are inherently introspective. They constantly analyze, reflect, and often overthink. They inhabit their inner world, meticulously crafting entire cognitive universes that remain invisible to others. Yet, on the other side, they are entirely human. They retain a fundamental need for intimacy, deep connection, and intellectual resonance. They seek a person who can genuinely understand, who hears the unspoken thoughts and comprehends the hidden self. This is the psychological dilemma. The sharper your intellect, the more arduous the task of locating someone who truly comprehends your particular brand of solitude. This is not a matter of perceived arrogance. It is supported by neuroscience. Dr. Thomas Sudendorf, an expert in cognitive evolution, posits that human brains developed within small tribal units of around 100 to 150 individuals. Our intelligence was optimized for survival and integration within these closely knit social groups. However, contemporary individuals with high IQs function in a drastically altered environment. They process data at an accelerated rate, engage in abstract thought, and challenge established norms. They no longer align with the emotional blueprint required for tribal acceptance, rendering their minds as evolutionary misfits. The world has lagged behind their cognitive wiring, and this disparity results in suffering. Profound intelligence frequently contributes to emotional dysregulation, not because of an inherent fault, but because there is an excessive amount of internal cognitive activity. Consider processing 10 concepts for every one concept processed by others. Imagine observing micro-expressions in every conversation. This level of acute sensitivity is not a conventional advantage. It acts as a burden. It can precipitate anxiety, depressive episodes, and emotional exhaustion, not because the external world is inherently hostile, but because it is not structured to accommodate individuals who experience and process reality with such intensity. A common assumption is that superior intellect instantly garners admiration, and while this is true initially, a darker element often lurks beneath the surface: envy. This emotion possesses a peculiar ability to transform respect into profound rejection. Most individuals will not admit this, even to themselves, but in daily life, highly intelligent people frequently encounter subtle, or sometimes blatant, resentment. This is not because they are unkind, but because their presence painfully exposes an underlying vulnerability in others: insecurity. When you enter a space and communicate with clarity, depth, or self-assurance, some listeners will disregard your actual message. Instead, they interpret your words as a reflection of their own inadequacy. They experience a sensation of being overshadowed, diminished, or overlooked. This internal discomfort is the ego attempting self-preservation. This dynamic is illuminated by the Dunning-Kruger effect, which describes how individuals with low competence tend to overestimate their abilities. Introducing a genuinely intelligent person into this environment instantly shatters that illusion of competence. Confronted with their limitations, many choose to retaliate. They label the intelligent person as arrogant, aloof, or strange, often accusing them of thinking they are superior. The irony is that the intellectual individual never uttered such a claim. The sensitive ego perceived it independently, because deep thinking challenges identity, not just ideas. In a tribal context, this creates a social danger. Standing apart, thinking unconventionally, and questioning norms historically risked exile. Thus, when an intelligent person disrupts group consensus, ancient protective instincts are triggered. This person is a threat. They must be cast out. This pattern of egoic retaliation spans history, from the execution of Socrates for exposing shallowness to the persecution of Alan Turing. People desire intellect only when it leaves their self-perception unchallenged. They might praise a genius online, but place them opposite someone who perceives reality with too much clarity, feels too much depth, and speaks with too much honesty, and conflict ensues. If you have faced rejection, not due to personal shortcomings, but for your clarity of vision, it confirms that your presence awakens a truth others are unprepared to face. Therefore, loneliness is not always indicative of an absence. Occasionally, it signifies an intellectual mismatch. A mind that pierces illusions, a heart that refuses superficiality, and a soul that prioritizes meaning over comfort will inevitably stand slightly apart. This is not social failure. It is the quiet confirmation that you are one of the few who's not merely existing, but truly awake. So, if this video resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced rejection for thinking deeply? Let's start a conversation. And if you want to explore more insights from history's greatest minds, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started.